You're on the hook for $6,000 for managing your abandoned property. I almost laughed, thinking it had to be some kind of bad joke. After 8 months away, I drove back to our family cabin and found this woman, Karen, acting like she owned the place. She was waving legal-looking papers in my face, ranting about liens and lawsuits, and talking like I was the trespasser. Neighbors I'd known for years suddenly treated me like a stranger. I was stunned, furious, and running on fumes. But once I uncovered what Karen had really been up to, she unraveled so spectacularly that 3 separate meltdowns didn't even cover it. Ever had someone try to take everything from you? Let me back up. 8 months before this, I got the call every adult dreads. Mom had stage 4 cancer, and the Denver doctors gave her maybe 6 months. I dropped everything, took leave from my consulting job, and moved into her apartment to care for her full-time. Those months were brutal. Watching the strongest woman I knew fade away. Even with insurance, the bills came to $40,000. By the time we buried her in May, I was emotionally wrecked and financially wiped out. All I wanted was to retreat to the cabin in Pine Valley, Colorado, and try to piece my life together. That Tuesday in mid-May, I headed up the winding road expecting calm. Instead, I saw a professional-looking woman in her mid-40s unloading equipment next to a white van labeled Pine Valley Management Services. She had everything: business cards, a polished folder, even a contractor's tool belt. Her confidence said she'd done this plenty of times. "Mr. Johnson," she called out without surprise. "Karen Willis, Pine Valley Management Services. Your property needed emergency oversight during your extended absence." She handed me an invoice that made my jaw drop. $6,000 in management fees plus $800 in penalties. The documents looked official. Letterhead, itemized charges for lawn care, security monitoring, pest control. But the kicker? At the bottom was a signature that looked like mine, authorizing it all. I had never seen her, never hired anyone, never signed anything. "This is fraud," I managed to say, trying to stay calm. Karen didn't even blink. She opened a thick folder and started laying out papers on my truck, hood like she was dealing cards, business license, liability insurance, county permits. She rattled off Colorado Revised Statute 38-12-204 about abandoned residential properties over 6 months and claimed they had filed proper notices with Pine County. The scariest part? She seemed to truly believe what she was saying. This wasn't a random hustler. This was organized. I called the Pine County Sheriff, sure this would be sorted quickly. Deputy Miller arrived, skimmed her paperwork, and basically shrugged. "Looks like a civil matter, sir. You'll have to take it to court." It felt like a gut punch. A month after burying my mom, someone was trying to take our family's property under the guise of legal authority. Karen smiled, calm, almost courteous, as she handed me more forms. Non-payment triggers an automatic lien within 15 business days. She explained like she was doing me a favor. "Here's our Know Your Rights pamphlet and payment options." Then she packed up with military precision, loaded the van, and left like it was just another Tuesday. That night, I sat on the deck staring at the stack of papers, trying to process. Friends kept texting, asking how I was adjusting after Mom. I couldn't even begin to explain. The cabin felt violated. For decades, this was our safe place, where Mom taught me to fish, where I'd brought girlfriends to watch mountain sunsets, where I planned to heal from the hardest months of my life. Now it felt like enemy territory. I kept staring at the signature. It looked enough like mine to make me doubt myself. Had I signed something in my grief? Toward the end, my head was foggy. The next morning brought another shock. A county utility truck idled at the end of my road. The driver studied my cabin through binoculars, then rolled off when I stepped outside. No note, no explanation, just the clear sense of being watched. Karen had shifted from paperwork to pressure. I needed help fast. But first I had to understand exactly what I was up against. Then came the photo that changed everything. Someone had left a Pine Valley Management Services business card on my mother's grave. I knew the picture was recent because of the fresh flowers I placed 3 days earlier. The message was crystal clear. Karen knew exactly where to hurt me. Hands shaking, I called my old college buddy Tom, now a lawyer in Boulder. "Tom, someone's trying to take my property, and they just threatened my mom's grave." 20 minutes later, he was on his way up the mountain. While waiting, my neighbor Mike Stevens knocked. Mike's a retired Pine County Sheriff's deputy who'd kept an eye on the cabin while I was in Denver. "Jack, you need to know who you're dealing with," he said, looking grim. "Karen Willis isn't a typical scammer. She used to work for the Pine County Planning Department before starting her property management company. She knows the law inside out." That explained the professional setup and her confidence. But Mike wasn't done. She tried to recruit me about 2 years ago for her so-called community protection services. Said absentee owners were a threat to property values. It felt too slick, too rehearsed. But her paperwork was airtight. Mike paused. "The thing is, Jack, county records got messy when everything went digital back in '75. A lot of old deeds aren't. The county's digital files hadn't been transferred cleanly. Anyone who knew the weak spots could exploit them." My stomach turned. If Karen understood those gaps, she could challenge almost anyone's ownership. When Tom arrived, I laid everything out: the invoice, the legal papers, the photo from Mom's grave. With every piece of evidence, his face darkened. "This isn't just harassment," he said, spreading the documents across my kitchen table. "It's a calculated plan. She's not angling for $6,000. She's trying to establish legal control over your land." Tom flipped open his laptop. Half an hour later, we were both staring at the screen in stunned silence. The digitized county database listed my family's cabin and surrounding acres as having unresolved ownership since the 1970s records overhaul. But Tom wasn't the type to stop there. He called Rebecca Hayes, the Pine County clerk, and asked her to pull the original paper deeds. What she found floored us both. "Mr. Johnson," Rebecca said over speakerphone, "your grandfather Samuel Johnson's 1952 homestead filing shows ownership of 1,847 acres. That's the entire Pine Valley development." Silence filled my kitchen. I didn't just own the cabin. I owned the valley. Karen's management operation was running on land that belonged to me. It hit like a freight train. Every home Karen claimed to supervise, every lot, every office, even the building she rented was on Johnson land. For 70 years, a clerical oversight had let people live, build, and do business on my grandfather's property without anyone realizing it. Tom already had his legal gears turning. "Jack, do you grasp what this means? This isn't just a property dispute. You might be the landlord of the entire community." The thought chilled me more than it thrilled me. I didn't want tenants. I just wanted to grieve. But before anything else, we had to confront Karen. Tom insisted on doing it publicly, with witnesses. We hid her at her office during business hours. Maximum exposure. That Tuesday, we walked into Pine Valley Management Services on Main Street. The waiting room was crowded with 8 clients. Perfect. Karen looked up with her usual polished smile. "Mr. Johnson, have you decided on a payment arrangement? The lien filing deadline is near." That's when I dropped the bomb. "Ms. Willis, you've been running your business on Johnson family land. We've owned this valley since 1952, including the building you're renting." For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her smile slipped. She rifled through the files on her desk. "That's clearly incorrect, Mr. Johnson. Our title research is thorough," she said, but the uncertainty had crept into her voice. She grabbed her phone, calling the county clerk, then the title company. Watching her unravel was like watching an earthquake in slow motion. Karen yanked files from her cabinet, tossing papers across the floor, muttering statutes under her breath, rechecking numbers. "This can't be. I personally verified 70 years of records, every deed, every transfer." Her voice rose higher, sharper. Clients stared. A few filmed her on their phones. The cool, professional woman from yesterday was coming apart in real time. Finally, she stood up and announced, "Due to an unexpected legal emergency, all appointments are postponed. The office will close until further notice." She hustled everyone out, locked the door, pulled the blinds. Through the glass, I could see her pacing, stopping to glare at papers on her desk. Tom and I exchanged looks. We'd shaken her, but this wasn't over. As we left, her assistant Beth, a young woman, hurried over. She looked rattled. "I've worked here 18 months. I've never seen her lose it like that," she whispered. "She's always in control. Whatever you just told her hit hard." Beth darted a glance around before leaning closer. Karen's been acting off lately. More desperate, more intense. If things get weird, call me. She slipped me a paper with her number. I might be able to help. 3 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You have 24 hours to withdraw your claims, or everyone will know what really happened to your mother's money. The message hit like a slap. What did Karen know about my mom's money? The medical bills, the insurance payouts, the small inheritance, everything was legitimate and documented. But the fact she even mentioned it meant she'd been digging through my private finances. How far had she gone? I tried calling back, but the number went to a generic voicemail. This wasn't just about land anymore. Karen had made it personal. I showed Tom. He told me to document everything and alert the police. But after yesterday's experience, I knew law enforcement wouldn't help until she crossed a clear legal line. Threatening texts from an untraceable number were hard to prove. Meanwhile, Karen had already launched her counterstrike. She'd hired Mountain West Genealogy Services to challenge my family's historic claims on a rush contract. And that wasn't even the worst part. Beth called that evening, voice hushed. She's contacting your relatives in Denver, Beth said, telling them there's an estate fraud investigation, claiming you're trying to steal land that isn't yours. It was brilliant and vile at once. Karen was weaponizing my grief, turning my own family against me. Some might even believe her. Grief makes people suspicious. When money's at stake, grief and suspicion multiply. Karen's true brilliance wasn't just legal maneuvering. It was her online smear campaign. She built a Facebook-style group called Pine Valley Community Protection Alliance, supposedly to shield local families from property fraud. Her first post was a masterclass in framing. An out-of-state land grabber is threatening over 200 families with fake claims. After disappearing for 8 months, he's back waving suspicious documents to steal our homes. Within 2 days, 127 residents had joined. She used my 8-month absence caring for my dying mother as proof I'd abandoned the community. The effect was immediate. At Pine Valley Market, conversations died when I walked in. People I'd known for years wouldn't meet my eyes. The cashier who once asked about Mom's health rang on my groceries without a word. Karen had cast me as a predatory outsider, and it was working. By Thursday, she called an emergency community meeting at Pine Valley Methodist Church. I wasn't invited, but Mike heard about it and told me we had to go. Walking into that sanctuary felt like stepping into enemy territory. 63 residents packed the pews. When they saw me, the temperature seemed to drop. Karen stood at the pulpit like a preacher, complete with a PowerPoint slideshow and glossy handouts. Friends and neighbors, she began, were facing an unprecedented threat to our stability and property values. She rolled video testimonials from neighbors, flipped through maintenance logs, framed herself as the hardworking local businesswoman protecting everyone from outside exploitation. Jack Johnson abandoned us for 8 months while we struggled with maintenance and security, she declared. Now he's back with suspicious legal documents, claiming ownership of land we've lived on peacefully for decades. Are we going to let an outsider destroy our community with frivolous claims? Murmurs rippled through the room. Some even applauded. When I tried to explain I'd been caring for my dying mother, a voice from the back yelled, "Convenient excuse. Why should we believe you?" Karen knew exactly which buttons to press. She turned my greatest sacrifice into evidence of betrayal. It was psychological warfare. Tom and I left feeling completely isolated. She'd cast herself as David battling Goliath, and I was Goliath. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next few days, she went door to door handing out community protection packets. Each looked official. Legal notices, property assessments, and warnings about dangerous land claims. She zeroed in on elderly residents who remembered old land disputes. "Mrs. Patterson," she'd say, "you've lived here 30 years. Will you let some stranger from Denver take what you built?" She even tried to flip Mike. She offered me $500 a month to monitor suspicious activity, he told me. When I asked what kind, she just smiled and said I'd know it when I saw it. Mike refused, but the bribe showed how seriously she was taking this fight. Only one person openly supported me, 75-year-old Rose Carter. She'd lived in Pine Valley since 1970, remembered my grandfather Samuel, and swore he'd never have wanted this kind of division. More importantly, she thought she might still have old survey papers in her basement that could prove my grandfather's land rights. Meanwhile, Beth, Karen's assistant, kept slipping me intel. She's burning her daughter's college fund on legal research, Beth whispered at the Pine Valley Diner. She's hired Stevenson and Associates, those high-priced Denver property lawyers. And she keeps mentioning federal jurisdiction overriding state records. I don't know what that means, but she's confident. The federal angle worried me. If Karen dragged federal agencies into this, she might invalidate everyone's claims, not just mine. By week's end, the town was split. 40-plus residents had signed Karen's petition demanding I drop my fraudulent claims. About 20 more were waiting to see how it played out. Only Mike and Rose stood by me. Karen had isolated me, cementing herself as the community's protector. But Rose's hint about old documents gave me a lifeline. Sure enough, Rose's basement was like stepping into Pine Valley's hidden history. Boxes of maps, letters, and photos labeled by decade in her neat handwriting. Then I found it. A 1974 letter from my grandfather finally got that federal boundary survey mess from 1962 straightened out with the Forest Service. Should prevent any future problems with property claims. Grandpa had dealt with federal land disputes long before me. This wasn't just county paperwork. There were federal issues I hadn't even considered. With this new evidence, Tom and I knew we had to get ahead of Karen's story before she owned the entire narrative. What would you do if your whole community turned on you? Ever had to fight for something everyone thought you were wrong about? Tell me in the comments. Your stories help me understand how real people face impossible battles. Karen had already proven herself to be a skilled manipulator, but she'd finally made one major misstep. Overconfident in her legal and PR tactics, she'd agreed to appear alongside me in a joint television interview. Channel 7 News wanted to cover the Pine Valley property dispute, and Karen leapt at the opportunity for free publicity. She clearly thought she could humiliate me live on camera and close the book on this fight for good. What she didn't know was that we'd uncovered evidence she hadn't accounted for. But before that interview, I had to endure Karen's increasingly aggressive smear campaign. She had hired a local public relations consultant, paying for it with money borrowed against her daughter's college fund. According to Beth's updates, Karen was spending funds she didn't have in order to destroy my reputation, an unmistakable sign of desperation. Her newly launched website, Community Management Solutions, recast her from small-time property manager into a polished community advocate defending local families from predatory land grabs. The rebranding was subtle but powerful. She was setting up a David and Goliath story with me as the corporate villain. Karen's media rollout was sophisticated. She lined up interviews with 3 different local outlets, each time bringing supportive character witnesses to vouch for her integrity and community service. The Pine Valley Gazette even ran a front-page article titled, "Local Woman Stands Up to Property Fraud Scheme," illustrated with photos of Karen at charity events and quick quotes from clients. On television, she used time-stamped service logs and short clips of neighborhood cleanups to reinforce her image as a tireless protector fighting off outside interference. When Channel 7's crew arrived for our joint interview, Karen came dressed for battle. 2 character witnesses in tow and a tablet loaded with videos from block parties and park maintenance days. It was a quiet but calculated signal about who truly belonged in Pine Valley. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica, staged the segment in the town square with the mountains as a backdrop. Karen spoke first, and I had to admit she was good. Looking straight into the camera, she declared, "I've dedicated 3 years of my life to safeguarding property values and maintaining community standards here in Pine Valley. Now we're facing an unprecedented threat from someone who disappeared for 8 months and returned with suspicious legal documents." She delivered her lines with the passion of someone who genuinely believed she was protecting her neighbors. She held up business licenses, insurance certificates, and community service awards like exhibits at trial. "These aren't just papers," she said. "They represent my commitment to this community and the families who trust me to protect their most valuable assets." Jessica nodded along as Karen painted herself as a responsible local fighting against a greedy outsider. It was my turn, Tom, and I had prepared for this moment carefully. Instead of going after Karen personally, I stuck to verifiable facts. I presented authenticated property deeds, county clerk confirmations of my family's ownership, and, most importantly, Rose's historical documents showing my grandfather had resolved similar disputes decades earlier. My family has owned this land since 1952, I said calmly. The county records confirm it. The historical documents support it. And I have witnesses who remember my grandfather addressing these same issues in the 1970s. That's when Karen's composure began to crack. When Jessica asked her to respond to the verified county records, Karen's voice went noticeably higher. Documents can be forged by anyone with enough money, she snapped, but doubt flickered in her eyes. I've spent 3 years building a legitimate business protecting this community. She suddenly rose from her chair, pointing at the camera. This is a coordinated attack on honest people trying to make a living. The transformation was dramatic. 30 seconds from composed professional to agitated accuser. The breaking point came when Jessica asked about the 1974 letter from my grandfather. Karen's eyes widened, realizing for the first time that there was evidence she hadn't anticipated. That document could be forged too, she stammered, her voice cracking. You can't destroy honest people with fake papers. She was shouting now, her carefully built image collapsing in real time. I've spent 3 years protecting this community. The cameras rolled as Karen ripped off her microphone and stormed out, leaving me calmly explaining the facts on air. The footage went viral within hours. Her meltdown spread across social media with comments ranging from sympathy to ridicule to outright mockery. The hashtag Karen Meltdown trended locally, and her professional facade disintegrated overnight. Several of her clients immediately canceled their management contracts. Membership in the Pine Valley Community Protection Alliance plummeted, and the supportive comments on her posts turned skeptical. Even people who had cheered for her at the church meeting began questioning whether they'd chosen the wrong side. But Karen wasn't done fighting. That same evening, she uploaded what she called an apology video to her business page, claiming she'd been ambushed by biased journalism and manipulated editing. I'm under tremendous stress from frivolous legal harassment, she said, trying to reclaim the victim role. My emotional response today reflects the pressure I'm under to protect the families depending on me. But the damage was already done. The comments were brutal, and the video got 3 times as many dislikes as likes. People saw through the attempt to spin her breakdown as righteous indignation. Beth called me later that night with disturbing news. Karen had spent the evening frantically phoning lawyers, PR specialists, and even private investigators. She's talking about hiring someone to dig into your personal life, Beth warned. She mentioned exposing the truth about your mother's money in your absence. Jack, I think she's getting dangerous. What had started as a property dispute was turning into a personal vendetta. Karen wasn't just fighting for money anymore. She was fighting for her reputation, her business, and maybe even her sanity. What unnerved me most was the cold, calculating expression she wore during those final seconds of the interview. Even as her composure crumbled in front of the cameras, I could almost see the gears turning in her head, plotting her next move. Karen wasn't the type to surrender quietly. If legal tricks and PR spin couldn't destroy me, what would she try next? I didn't have to wait long for the answer. That night, Mike called in a panic. Get out of the cabin now, he warned. Karen's car is parked at the end of your driveway with the headlights off. His words sent a chill down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to my bedroom window. Sure enough, a dark sedan sat about 50 yards away, engine running but lights out. In the moonlight, I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat, staring at my cabin. This wasn't casual surveillance. This was intimidation. Karen had escalated from legal warfare to psychological harassment, and it was working. I felt trapped in my own home. I called Mike back and asked him to keep watch while I figured out what to do next. 20 minutes later, the car vanished into the dark without switching its headlights on. Whoever was behind the wheel knew these mountain roads well enough to drive them blind. The message was clear. Karen could get to me anytime she wanted. I barely slept that night, jumping at every creak the old cabin made. By morning, I was exhausted and on edge, exactly how she wanted me. But when I checked my security system footage, everything changed. The timestamp showed someone had approached my cabin at 2:47 a.m., 11 minutes after the car disappeared. Using Mike's retired cop instincts, we analyzed the grainy footage frame by frame. "That's definitely Karen," he said, pointing out a distinctive left shoulder hitch. "She's had that limp since a car accident 5 years ago." I remember processing that insurance claim. The video showed her jimmying open my back door with some kind of tool, spending exactly 11 minutes inside, then slipping out the same way she'd come. She'd planted something in my cabin while an accomplice kept watch from the road. What we found made my blood boil. 3 handwritten letters hidden in my desk drawer, supposedly from me to Karen, each one sounding more unhinged than the last. The forgeries were sophisticated. Someone had studied my handwriting and even included private details only an insider would know. My mother's medical treatment, my financial situation, the insurance settlements from her estate. "You're going to pay for what you've done to my family," one letter read. "People like you don't deserve to live in peace." That morning, Karen filed for a restraining order, presenting these planted letters as proof I was spiraling into violence over failed fraud schemes. The Pine County Courthouse scheduled an emergency hearing for Friday afternoon. If the order were granted, I'd be legally barred from accessing my own property. Karen's strategy was diabolical. Manufacture evidence of threats, then use it to have me removed. Tom was furious when he saw the letters. "This is evidence tampering, breaking and entering, and harassment," he said. "But proving she planted them without clear video is going to be tough." That's when Beth called with intel that changed everything. Karen's been digging into federal land surveys from the 1960s. She whispered at our secret meeting in the Pine Valley Diner. She found something in the National Forest Service archives she thinks gives her leverage over everyone, not just you. Beth's face was pale as she went on. She's already contacted the Forest Service regional office about what she's calling private property encroachment on federal land. "Jack, she's not just challenging your ownership anymore. She's trying to bring the federal government down on the entire valley." The realization hit me like a freight train. If Karen convinced federal authorities there were unresolved boundary disputes between private property and national forest land, she could effectively void everyone's property deeds. It was a scorched earth strategy. If she couldn't control Pine Valley, she'd burn the whole thing down and start fresh. Tom immediately started researching federal land law, while I tried to grasp the scale of what Karen was attempting. She wasn't just desperate. She was brilliant, an evil kind of brilliant. According to Beth, Karen had uncovered 1962 Forest Service archives suggesting errors in the original boundary surveys. Those discrepancies created overlapping jurisdictions that had never been fully resolved. Her plan was to weaponize those records to challenge all private ownership in Pine Valley, positioning herself as the person who could fix the chaos she'd unleashed. If federal authorities assert jurisdiction, state deeds become meaningless, Tom said grimly. She could push 200 families off their land and pick up federal management contracts in the aftermath. On Tuesday morning, the U.S. Forest Service issued a formal announcement, a boundary investigation affecting Pine Valley property owners. Certified letters went out to every resident, requiring them to appear at a mandatory hearing to prove ownership under federal review. Panic swept through the valley. People who had lived peacefully for decades suddenly faced the possibility of losing their homes to a federal land seizure. Karen's social media group exploded with activity. Angry posts, frantic questions, demand for answers. And Karen was ready with all three. Her latest post framed the federal investigation as the inevitable consequence of my fraudulent land claims drawing government scrutiny. "This is exactly what I warned about," she wrote. "Jack Johnson's suspicious legal maneuvers have triggered federal attention that threatens every family in our community. Now we're all paying the price for his greed and deception." The narrative was airtight. I had caused a crisis, and Karen was the only one qualified to solve it. Dozens of people who had stayed neutral now turned against me. Tom's legal research revealed just how dangerous the situation had become. Federal land jurisdiction overrides state property law, he explained. If the Forest Service decides there are legitimate boundary disputes, they can void conflicting private claims and assert federal control. The 1974 letter from my grandfather suddenly took on a whole new meaning. He'd apparently resolved. Similar boundary conflicts with federal land had been resolved decades earlier, but somewhere along the way, the documentation of that settlement was lost in the shuffle of government bureaucracy. That Thursday evening's community meeting was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. The Pine Valley High School gymnasium overflowed with anxious homeowners desperate for answers. Karen stood at the podium like a wartime general rallying her forces. "Friends, our community is under existential threat," she declared. "Federal officials are questioning whether we even have the right to remain in homes we've owned for generations. But I've spent 3 years cultivating relationships with government agencies, studying regulations, and defending property rights. If we stand together, I can guide us through this crisis." The applause shook the gym. People were terrified, confused, desperate for someone to blame, and someone to save them. Karen filled both roles perfectly. I became the scapegoat who had triggered federal scrutiny, while she painted herself as the savior who could steer them through the storm of bureaucracy. By the end of the night, several families had privately offered to pay her management fees if she could protect their homes from federal seizure. She had turned a crisis of her own, making into her biggest business opportunity yet. Later, as Jack examined the planted evidence with Tom, his face froze. One of the threatening letters carried a detail only 3 people on Earth could possibly know. When my eyes landed on that forged note, my blood went cold. In the 3rd paragraph was a reference to my mother's final words, words she had whispered to me in her hospital bed, just hours before she passed away. "Tell them the mountain remembers everything." It had been a strange, almost delirious phrase that never fully made sense, since she had been heavily medicated and drifting in and out of lucidity. I had never shared it with a soul, never written it down, never even grasped its meaning. Only 3 people could know those words, my mother, myself, and whoever had been standing outside her hospital room that night. The realization struck like a blow. Karen hadn't only researched my property records and legal history, she had stalked me during my most vulnerable moment. While I sat in sorrow beside my dying mother, Karen had been lurking in the corridors, gathering words she would later weaponize against me. She had twisted sacred memories into ammunition, forging them into a manufactured death threat. Tom noticed my expression instantly. "What is it?" he asked. "She was there," I whispered, showing him the letter. "Karen was at Denver General Hospital the night my mother died. She heard Mom's last words and turned them into this forgery." Tom's face drained of color. "Jack, this proves she's been planning for months, maybe even before your mother passed. This isn't just property fraud. It's psychological warfare." We contacted the Pine County Sheriff immediately, but Deputy Miller brushed it aside. His focus was on the looming federal inquiry, not Karen's escalating terror campaign. "Sir, with respect," he said, "we've got bigger problems. The Forest Service wants interviews with every property owner. Your personal dispute with Ms. Willis will have to wait." Meanwhile, Karen was orchestrating her next move. She launched a Save Pine Valley countywide live stream, replacing the crowded gym with a studio set, reading selected questions on camera. With a scrolling chat of cheering names, she controlled every angle and every word. On screen, she was calm, confident, untouchable. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice carrying like a sermon. "This isn't just about property rights. This is about the survival of our community." Her speech pressed every emotional button. Families rooted in Pine Valley for generations, children who had grown up in the mountains, elders who had hoped to retire in peace. "The federal government questions our right to exist here because of one person's fraudulent claims," she warned. The audience devoured it. She then introduced Pine County Commissioner Brad Walsh, who handed her an official community service award. The applause lasted nearly 3 minutes. Mayor Jennifer Santos publicly endorsed her efforts. A Pine Valley Gazette photographer captured the scene as Karen submitted her role as the people's champion against federal overreach. She was no longer just a property manager. She was their leader, their voice, their savior. When I attempted to attend the rally, the hostility was suffocating. Neighbors who had once greeted me warmly turned their backs. A coffee cup sailed toward me, and Mike had to pull me out for safety. "Go back to Denver," someone shouted. "Stop tearing down our community." The anger was real and dangerous. Karen had convinced nearly everyone that I alone had endangered their homes. To them, I was the outsider who triggered the investigation that threatened their lives. But while she basked in the glow of her stage heroism, Tom was racing against time to rescue everyone's property rights. His digging had uncovered proof that my grandfather's 1974 boundary settlement was preserved in the Colorado State Archives, but never properly filed at the federal level. The original surveyor had documented sending it to both state and federal offices, but the federal copy had vanished during a 1983 Denver office merger. If that correction could be filed before the hearing, every boundary issue would resolve in my favor. The process was a bureaucratic nightmare. Federal courts required 72 hours notice, and we had less than 48. Tom spent an entire day on phones with archivists, court clerks, and federal staff, scrambling for an expedited path. Then Rose's basement trove provided the missing piece. Her collection included the surveyor's handwritten notes, showing he had mailed the correction to the Forest Service under file number FS197447. Mike volunteered for the riskiest mission. With 30 years of law enforcement contacts, he drove 6 hours to Denver to retrieve the original documents from the archives. "I failed this community once by staying quiet when Karen started her scheme," he told me. "I'm not failing again." His guilt over staying silent had weighed on him for months, and this was his chance at redemption. He attacked the mission with military precision. While Mike raced toward Denver, Karen staged a pre-hearing press conference. Backed solidly by the community, Karen posed for local news cameras surrounded by cheering supporters, looking polished and in control. "Tomorrow," she promised, "federal officials will finally expose these fraudulent property manipulation schemes." Her voice rose as she declared, "Our community has endured months of harassment and legal intimidation, but justice will prevail." She had even scheduled what she called a community victory celebration for Saturday evening, catered food, live music, and all. Karen was so certain of her federal strategy that she was celebrating before the hearing began. Meanwhile, Tom's legal team was running on no sleep. When Mike returned from Denver carrying certified copies of the 1974 boundary correction, we had exactly 18 hours to finish the federal filing. Tom's law clerk drove through the night, arriving at the South District Court in Denver with just 4 hours to spare before the mandatory notification deadline. We had successfully placed the boundary correction into federal. Karen had no idea had happened. The night before the hearing, sleep wouldn't come. Everything, my family's land, the community's fate, and Karen's scheme, was about to be decided. My grandfather's old letters about a 1962 boundary mess ran through my head. He had fought bureaucrats and territorial disputes long before I was born, somehow finding a way to protect our land. By tomorrow, I would know whether his work would save us or whether Karen's manipulation would doom an entire town. Beth called late with fresh intel on Karen's mindset. "She's been up all night," Beth said, studying federal land law and rehearsing her speech. "She's convinced she's about to win the biggest victory of her career." Jack, I've never seen her so sure of herself. That confidence frightened me more than anything else. Karen rarely miscalculated. What did she know that we didn't? Still, Tom managed to file the 1974 boundary correction with exactly 4 hours left. Karen's side remained in the dark. Have you ever been in a situation that felt hopeless until the very last moment? Sometimes the biggest wins happen when you're right on the edge of losing everything. Share your comeback stories below. I read them all, and they fuel my resolve to keep fighting. The next morning, the federal courthouse in downtown Denver was over capacity, with overflow crowds spilling onto the steps outside. News crews from 3 stations had their cameras rolling, treating the hearing like the headline event it had become. Karen arrived in a black sedan with a small entourage of Pine Valley loyalists. She looked every inch the community champion, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than most people's rent. Her self-assurance was palpable. She walked like someone who had already won. Inside, Federal Judge Patricia Rise called the hearing to order with crisp authority. The gallery overflowed with Pine Valley residents, federal staff, and more media than I'd ever seen in one room. Most of the seats were taken by Karen supporters wearing Save Pine Valley buttons and waving signs demanding protection from property fraud. The atmosphere felt less like a hearing and more like a political rally. Karen's opening was flawless. She spoke before Judge Hendricks with the poise of a veteran litigator, outlining the community's plight and the federal government's duty to act. Your Honor, Pine Valley embodies exactly the kind of rural stability federal land policy is meant to safeguard, she said. For months, we've endured harassment from fraudulent property claims threatening not just families, but the entire fabric of our mountain community. Her research was laid out meticulously. The 1962 boundary confusion, incomplete surveys, and overlapping claims between private property and national forest land. Resident after resident followed her to the stand, vouching for her professionalism and expressing fear of losing their homes to my supposed legal maneuvering. An older woman, Margaret Patterson, spoke of 32 peaceful years in Pine Valley only to face displacement because of my out-of-state property grab. A young father described the terror of possibly losing the home where his children had learned to walk and ride bikes. Karen had coached them perfectly. Each testimony drove home her narrative that I was a wealthy outsider exploiting legal technicalities to ruin a tight-knit community. Her strongest point came when she presented data. She held up charts showing declining complaints at the properties she managed, pointed to maintenance timelines, and treated response times as if they were case law. These documents reflect 3 years of service to Pine Valley families, she told Judge Hendricks. Every property I manage has improved maintenance, rising values, and stronger community standards. This is about more than ownership. It's about stewardship of our mountain resources. The gallery broke into applause until the judge called for order. Then our turn came. Tom rose slowly, steady and composed, and walked to the bench. Your Honor, I'd like to present newly filed federal documentation that resolves every boundary dispute in this case. Karen's head jerked up, the first crack in her composure. Tom handed the court clerk certified copies of my grandfather's 1974 boundary correction along with the emergency filing receipts. This documentation, filed with this court 4 hours ago, confirms complete resolution of any federal boundary disputes affecting Pine Valley properties. The government's own witness finished the job. David Morrison from the U.S. Geological Survey reviewed the documents and testified with quiet authority. Based on this comprehensive boundary resolution, all private property claims in Pine Valley are legitimate and properly documented, he stated. The 1962 survey discrepancies have been fully investigated and settled. There are no outstanding federal jurisdiction conflicts affecting Pine Valley. That's when I watched Karen's world implode in real time. The color drained from her face as she realized her federal strategy had just been obliterated. She rifled through papers, whispering frantically, I offered voluntary lease agreements at half the normal market rate. All of the revenue went straight back into community improvements, road repair, snow clearing, and emergency services, while families had the freedom to join or manage their land independently. No pressure, no scare tactics, no hidden traps. Rose stepped into the role of community historian, preserving the genuine accounts Karen had twisted for her own agenda. Her basement collection eventually became a proper archive, housed in the community center we built inside Karen's former office. Karen knew that whoever controls the story controls the people, Rose explained. But real history is untidy and far more truthful than any one version someone tries to impose. The federal case also set important legal precedents, shielding other rural communities from similar fraud. The Department of Justice even released guidelines for spotting advanced property management scams, using Karen's scheme as the model. Tom testified before Congress about the loopholes that had allowed her to thrive, which led to new laws tightening oversight of rural property companies. The most unexpected change came from Karen herself. In prison, according to her daughter Ashley, she finally began receiving proper mental health care. Mom admits now that she lost her sense of perspective, Ashley shared at a meeting. She started believing her own stories about being a protector, even when she was actually causing harm. Inspired by that realization, Ashley used her mother's college savings to pursue a degree in social work, determined to help people in healthier ways than Karen ever managed. Despite Karen's warnings of collapse, Pine Valley's property values climbed 25% after her arrest. The community's new reputation for honesty and collaboration drew families who wanted real mountain living rather than artificial management. The Pine Valley Community Association began publishing quarterly newsletters filled with resident stories, useful resources, and candid discussions about local challenges. The ripple effect spread beyond Pine Valley. Former clients from other counties reached out, seeking guidance on moving from coercive management to genuine cooperation. Soon the Pine Valley approach was being adopted across rural Colorado. What began as one woman's elaborate con became an unlikely blueprint for ethical community building. On quiet evenings, I often sat on my deck overlooking the valley my grandfather Samuel had worked to preserve. The land itself holds the truest history. The relationships, the struggles, the triumphs that no manipulator can erase forever. Karen tried to overwrite Pine Valley's story, but the mountains remember longer and stronger than any individual's ambition. At the community center, a plaque hangs with a simple dedication: to real service over manufactured emergencies, to cooperation over coercion, and to truth over easy lies. Karen's old office now serves as a gathering place for potluck dinners, children's programs, and open community meetings where every voice carries weight. Looking back, I understood the difference between winning and achieving justice. Winning would have meant exposing Karen quickly and locking her up before she harmed anyone else. Justice meant guiding an entire community to rebuild trust after systematic betrayal. Pine Valley didn't just survive Karen's scheme. We became more united, more resilient, and stronger than ever because we endured it together.